What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me, and we are going to be continuing my series on my NHL 2021-2022 season predictions for this upcoming year. Now, as we move along in the Pacific Division, we are going to be covering the Seattle Kraken, the NHL's newest franchise. Now, being that this is the Seattle Kraken's very first year in the NHL, I feel like there's some mixed feelings about where people think this team stands. Like, I can definitely see that this organization thinks that the Seattle Kraken are going to be a legitimate competitive team and potentially make the playoffs in the Pacific Division. I'm sure there's fans out there who look at this team on paper and say, man, this is not a very good team. They're probably going to be competing for a number one overall pick. Now, typically when I go over every single NHL team, I tend to go over some stats they all possessed last season. But seeing that this is Seattle's first season, I couldn't do that. I have no stats to cover. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to give you guys something a little bit different to pass the time and give you guys my opening lineup projections for the Seattle Kraken in their inaugural season. Now, looking at this lineup on paper, I know there's a lot of people who probably don't see a ton of talent here, including myself. I feel like they could have drafted a little bit better, especially up front. But regardless, I'm going to go over my projected lineup here. So on the top line, I got Jaden Schwartz, Yani Gourd, and Jordan Eberly. Obviously, Yani Gourd is going to miss some time, but when healthy, he's probably going to be playing in a first-line center role. And on the wings with Jaden Schwartz and Jordan Eberly, both of these guys are pretty consistent 50-point players. On the second line, I got Cali Yar Crook with Alexander Wenberg and Jonas Donskoi. All three of these guys are pretty decent goal scorers, and on most teams are probably best suited in a third line, but because the Seattle team was just drafted, they're probably top 6 forwards on this team. And on the third line, I got Brandon Tanev, Jared Mccann, and Mason Appleton. Appleton being a decent depth piece for coming from Winnipeg, and Jared McCann and Brandon Tanev both coming from Pittsburgh, which is why I thought maybe this would be a good third line, because Brandon Tanev used to play in Winnipeg, so he used to play with Appleton, and of course last season he was playing with Jared McCann, so there's a little bit of chemistry there. And on the fourth line, I got Colin Blackwell with Marcus Johansson and Nathan Bastian. Honestly, this is just a paper-filling fourth line. Marcus Johansson, not really the offensive player he once was. Bastian's just kind of been a fourth line his whole career. Blackwell, coming off a pretty good goal-scoring year with the Rangers, but probably meant to be a fourth liner. And now this is where I think the team starts to turn around for the better. If you look at their defense, on the top pair, I have Mark Giordano and Vince Dunn. Obviously, Mark Giordano coming from the Calgary Flames. He was their captain, one of their best defensemen ever. Obviously, he's a little bit older, but I feel like he can be a really good presence out there as a top pair D-man. And Vince Dunn, who really needed to change the scenery from St. Louis. He's still very young, and he's got a lot of offensive upside. I feel like he can be the leading point getter for this blue line on the Seattle Kraken. And then on the second pair, I got two solid shutdown defensemen in Jamie Alexiak and Adam Larson. Obviously, Alexiak was a very solid top 4 defenseman for Dallas, and Adam Larson likewise with Edmonton. I think those two can work together as a pretty solid shutdown second pair and give some other teams some headaches. And then on the third pair, I got Carson Soucy with Jeremy Lauzon. Soucy being a pretty serviceable defenseman mini, and Jeremy Lauzon still a very young guy coming from the Bruins. Definitely there's some upside there, maybe some potential that he can crack up in a top 4 role as the season goes on. And then in goal, obviously they acquired Chris Drieger from the Florida Panthers, who was going to be their starting goaltender until they signed Philip Grubauer from Colorado. So now they got a pretty good goaltending tandem entering this season. And then based on what they drafted, I have a couple of scratches here for the lineup. Most notably would be Dennis Cholowski. I think he's still a pretty young defenseman who could have some upside and maybe kind of resurrect his career with the Kraken, because it wasn't really working out in Detroit. Overall, looking at this roster, and you'd see that goal scoring is probably the biggest issue on this team. If I had to take a guess, this is more than likely probably a bottom 5 offensive team entering this season. But in terms of defense and goaltending, I feel like they did a pretty good job drafting this team. I really see a lot of solid potential with this defense. And with that goaltending with Grubauer, who was a Vezina nominee, and Chris Drieger, who's been probably the best backup in the league the last couple of years, that might be the best tandem in the entire league. Am I crazy to say that? So I can definitely see a scenario where they establish themselves as more of a shutdown defensive team and really frustrate their opponent. Kind of giving me more New York Islanders vibes, I guess. Because Seattle was not a team last season. There was no top 5 scorers on their team. But based on who they drafted, these are who their top 5 scorers would have been last season. So the leading scorer would have been Yani Gourd with 17 goals, 19 assists for 36 points. Leading in all offensive categories. Obviously on Tampa Bay, Yani Gourd was sheltered in a third line role. But seeing as the Kraken don't have a ton of offensive weapons right now, Gourd is definitely going to be relied upon to be the number 1 center for this team. Next, we have Jordan Eberly with 16 goals and 17 assists for 33 points in 55 games with the Islanders. Eberly's always been a solid winger, but on the Islanders, he was kind of sheltered offensively since the Islanders are a team that's more known for their shutdown play. So maybe going to a team like Seattle, he can elevate his game and take it to another level offensively. And in third, we got Jared McCann, who actually had a really solid year with Pittsburgh, very underrated. 43 games, 14 goals, 18 assists for 32 points. And this was primarily playing in a third line center role behind Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. Sometimes he was pushed in the top 6, especially when Malkin went down with injury. But Mccann's definitely a guy that can provide some really good depth scoring if he can score at the same pace as he did last season. And then in fourth, we would have Jonas Donskoi with 17 goals and 14 assists for 31 points in 51 games with the Colorado Avalanche. Again, playing in a third line role for the Avs, but he scored fairly well in that situation. But now playing in a top 6 role at the Seattle Kraken, most likely, this could elevate his production a bit. And in fifth, we have Alexander Wenberg, who in 56 games scored 17 goals and 12 assists for 29 points for the Florida Panthers. The thing with Wenberg, though, is he had an insanely high shooting percentage last year, so I don't exactly know if he can provide that same type of offense as he did, but we'll have to see. Maybe with the Seattle Kraken, he takes his game to another level and really resurrects himself as a legitimate top 6 center. Then, of course, the goaltending, fantastic numbers. First, we got Philip Grubauer, 40 games, 39-1 record with the Avs, with a 1.95 goals against average and a .922 save percentage. Vezina finalist, very solid year. And then we have Chris Drieger, who in 23 games had a 14-6-3 record with the Florida Panthers, with a 2.07 goals against average and a .927 save percentage. Seeing that the Panthers didn't have great goaltending with Sergei Bobrovsky, Chris Drieger was really relied upon to play solidly to keep that Panthers team relevant, and of course, it worked out. The Panthers had an amazing year, and Chris Drieger was a massive part of that success. So overall, I think it's a pretty decent team, and they might be a little bit better than people might expect. All right, so now it's time for the moment of truth, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on how well I feel the Seattle Kraken are going to play this season. Based on the roster I showed you, mainly due to the defense and goaltending, I expect at the very least they're going to be a pretty competitive team entering this year. Especially in the Pacific Division, which is much weaker, there might be a ton of opportunity for them to actually make the playoffs. Obviously, their scoring is a massive hole they need to fill. Based on the roster they have and their forward group, it's a little bit lackluster at this point. It could definitely improve a little bit. But adding guys in free agency like Jaden Schwartz and Alexander Wenberg, it helped out a little bit, I guess. So now I'm going to give you guys a rundown of who I feel are going to be the top 5 scorers on the Seattle Kraken this season. So in first, I have a free agent signing here, Jaden Schwartz, finishing with 24 goals and 32 assists for a total of 56 points. Now, Schwartz is coming off a pretty disappointing year in St. Louis, but I definitely think he's more than capable of bouncing back. Over the course of his career, Schwartz has been averaging about 50 points a season or hovering around that. So I really think a change of scenery is exactly what he needed, and I really can see him lead the team in scoring this year. And then in second, I have Jordan Eberly finishing with 23 goals and 27 assists for 50 points. Like Schwartz, Jordan Eberly is a very consistent top 6 winger, seems to be putting up 50 points after 50 points every single season. So I feel like a 20 plus goal season and about 50 points seems very fair for him. And in third, I have Yani Gourd with 19 goals and 28 assists for 47 points. Notice that I have the 70-ish games played right beside it. That's because he's supposed to be missing about a month of the season to start. Obviously, with that would take him to about 70 games played if he does play the rest of the year. He hasn't produced at this rate since his rookie year in Tampa Bay. I feel like him playing in a top-line center role, most likely on this Kraken team, his production should spike up quite a bit. So in about 70 games, for him to hover around 50 points, I really don't think that's too much to ask, honestly. But maybe it is. And then in fourth, I got Cali Yar Crook with 17 goals and 25 assists for 42 points. You know, Cali Yar Crook's a very decent middle 6 winger. He's always been playing in a middle 6 role in the Nashville Predators throughout his entire career. But in a top 6 role, maybe he plays a little bit better and elevates his production a little bit. Yar Crook's a guy that I don't think a lot of people expect a ton from him, but maybe in an elevated role, he can be a guy that low-key breaks out a bit. Who knows? And in fifth on the team, I got Jonas Donskoi with 20 goals and 18 assists for 38 points. Donskoi's best goal-scoring years have come in the past couple years with Colorado, all on a third line role. So I feel like if he's going to get a ton of opportunity to play in the top 6, which he probably will, I feel like that should elevate him to at least 20 goals. Again, he's another guy that can probably have a sneaky good year and maybe score more than 20 goals, maybe hit about 25. But I don't expect a ton more than about 40 points, let's say. Finishing off the video, I'm going to give you guys my predictions on where I think they'll finish in the standings this upcoming year. Now, seeing that this is an expansion team, I know a lot of people are going to have some preconceived notions about how good this team is going to be. I know a lot of you might think this is a dog shit team on paper, but honestly, I see a lot of competitive potential with them. I could definitely see them finishing a lot better than people might think, potentially making the playoffs. Again, the Pacific, not a very tough division. You have to remember when Vegas first entered the league, there was no expectations for them to do anything, but of course, they had Marc-Andre Fleury, who was a Vezina caliber goaltender, and he really carried a pretty mediocre team, honestly, all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, I'm not saying the Kraken are going to be that team, but when you have a tandem like Philip Grubauer and Chris Drieger, you just never know. Those are two really good goaltenders. Maybe the Kraken can ride the wave with those guys and be a very, very good team. In terms of where I do have them, I have them finishing 5th in the Pacific Division with a 36, 34, and 12 record, for a total of 84 points. As you can see, I have them pretty competitive, but I don't have them making the playoffs. But even so, I really don't think it's as bad as a team as people might peg them out to be. I just look at their very good goaltending tandem and their solid defense, and I really think that they can give a lot of teams headaches, and I feel like they're going to be in a ton of games with those goaltenders standing on their heads game in and game out. With 84 points, I guess I kind of have them as a mediocre team, but I don't have them as a trash team as some of you might think. Again, I don't think they're good enough to make the playoffs, but I definitely don't anticipate them to be a bottom 5 team in the NHL. Honestly, I don't even think I have them as a bottom 10 team in the NHL. I really do see them as closer to being a middle of the pack team than a team that's going to be in the running for a number 1 overall pick. So with that is going to wrap up my season preview of the Seattle Kraken. Again, let me know your thoughts on what you think this team is going to do. Do you think they're going to be absolutely garbage and not do anything and be one of those shit expansion teams like most expansion teams are? Or are they going to go on a Cinderella run like Vegas and make the Stanley Cup Finals? I don't know. Or do you have them like me? They're going to be mediocre, somewhat competitive, but not quite good enough to be a playoff team. Love to hear your thoughts once again. Please like this video and consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you guys.